pretty regularly actually, because Jenny used to live up the hill here. We just got married down the road. And so I'm thrilled that right here in Mortdale, the benefits of what we've done to cut fuel taxes to give people cost of living relief right now as a result of this budget is being felt right here at the Bowser. And to see those prices getting down to what we see here, 166.9, and we're seeing that right across the country. We've seen 20 to 30 cent falls already all around the country in what's happening with fuel prices. Now, this didn't happen by accident. This has happened because in the last 12 months, the economic plan that we have put in place has seen a $100 billion turnaround in the budget position. And that is because we've got more people off welfare and into work. It's happened because we've kept discipline about how we were spending. Yes, we've had to invest to support the Australian economy, but we've known when to get in and support, just like we're doing again now. And we also know when that support has to be rounded out. And as we've come through this pandemic, what we know is our opponents, the Labor Party, would have spent an extra $81 billion during the pandemic. Now, we knew when we had to see some of the measures we had before that helped our economy come through. But the Labor Party wanted to keep on spending and spending and spending. And what that would have meant is that we would not have been in a position to harness the gains that we have been able to put in place through how we've come through this pandemic with the strongest economic rebound we've seen in Australia in 70 years and provide that cost of living relief right now. It would also have put our AAA credit rating at risk, which was reaffirmed on budget night by S&P because of the balance that we had in our budget, which would put upward pressure on interest rates. Under our government, keeping our AAA credit rating, keeping expenditure balanced and in control to get our economy through the pandemic, that puts downward pressure on interest rates and it puts downward pressure on inflation. And that's been recognised by our credit rating agencies. And so I'm very pleased to see already what we thought might even take a bit longer than this, that we're seeing that cost of living relief flow through to Australian families, to individuals as they're going off to work, getting around the city and ensuring that they can get that cost of living relief now, cost of living relief that's been provided by good economic management, strong budget management. That's what we're known for, and that's what we'll continue to deliver our economic plan. Now, I'll ask the Foreign Minister to make a few remarks about heading off to NATO later today.
Thanks, PM, and great to be here in the St George area again, and fabulous to be here with David Coleman and Jenny Ware in particular. Because I'm in Mortdale, I have to say that, like many of the community here, every week I am willing the Mighty Dragons on and on. It's a challenge, but we are there behind the Mighty Dragons, so let me start with that. Can I say, though, Prime Minister, that I am leaving this evening, as you have advised, for a meeting of NATO foreign ministers and close partners in Brussels in relation to Russia's actions in Ukraine. The coordination that this meeting will strengthen and enable is core to the global response to Russia's unlawful, egregious and unprovoked actions. They are a wholesale breach of international law, a wholesale breach of the UN Charter. So the work that we have been doing in applying sanctions, including over 500 people and entities in the last month, the support that we have provided through humanitarian aid, and that is being delivered through trusted partners on the ground in Ukraine and in neighbouring countries, and through Australian aid organisations, and the military support that we have provided is key to our coordination with our international partners. I look forward to meeting with the key members of NATO and those counterparts in the coming days in Brussels to reaffirm Australia's support and to reinforce our engagement in this key international cooperation. Thanks, PM.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. Happy to take some questions.
Prime Minister, I guess you've come full circle on this petrol price business, because 2 months ago at the press club you couldn't even name the price.
Well, what we were talking about a few months ago when we were looking at excise issues, that you weren't going to make any real difference to petrol prices by making some marginal changes. And what has happened over months now is as we've seen the invasion of Ukraine take hold, and we've seen the impact of that on petrol prices. And they were getting up over $2.20, up to $2.30. And now we see them at these levels because of the intervention that we've made. You see, our response when it comes to things like this is we don't make knee-jerk responses to issues. We think carefully about the design of our changes. That's what we did on JobKeeper. We made sure we got that right. We saved 700,000 jobs and many lives, I'm quite certain. Many businesses were able to get through the pandemic because of the strong economic management that we provided. And we were able to maintain our AAA credit rating at the same time. And that's what's ensured that we've been able to realise the biggest economic comeback this country has seen in 70 years. We've gone through this very difficult economic time that was 30 times worse than the global financial crisis back when Labor was last in government. But yet we got an employment outcome that was 50% better. And I think that says a lot about the contrasting approaches of Labor and the Liberals and Nationals. That when we're dealing with a crisis, we get the design right, we get the interventions right, we maintain Australia's financial and economic security, and we get better economic outcomes. Under Labor, when they faced the crisis, and this one has been 30 times worse, we actually saw unemployment rise over their government from 4.2% to 5.7%. Now going through an economic crisis 30 times worse, we have seen unemployment fall from 5.7% when we came to government, now down to just 4%, and it's heading further down. That is the contrast of economic management between the Liberals and the Nationals and Labor and the Greens.
This measure, why couldn't you find the 60 million or so for the Lismore flood victims? And the New South Wales government were under the impression that you were going to go halves in this $112 million back home grants. Yesterday they had to announce it by themselves. Why didn't you agree to go halves in relation to that?
Well, the Commonwealth Government has already invested, $2.1 billion in the New South Wales flood response. And directly, $1 billion has already been paid directly. Now that $1 billion that we've put in directly, that is 100% funded by the Commonwealth Government. And there are many other measures also, including $50 million to support anchor businesses in the Northern Rivers area, which is 100% funded by the Commonwealth Government. So when you come together to respond to a flood crisis, and this is normal procedure, there are some things that the Commonwealth pays for 100%, there are some things that the state government pays for, and there are some things where we share the costs. And all up, our commitment into New South Wales for the flood response is $2.1 billion, and $1 billion of that is already in the pockets of those who've needed it most.
If you're taking credit for petrol price responsibility if they go up between now and election day?
Well, what I can simply say is that we have provided 22 cents a litre relief on fuel tax. That's come off to ensure that people can have lower prices. Prices will still move around, but what I do know is they'll be 22 cents a litre less than what they would otherwise be. And that's what the ACCC is there for, to police these things, to make sure that these tax cuts for motorists are in place and pass through. And they have penalties and powers to ensure that people follow through. But I must admit, I'm very pleased with the way that the fuel industry has responded. We have seen them move quickly. We have seen them pass this on much quicker than we'd anticipated. And so I thank them for that. They want to give their motorists a good deal. They want to be able to pass on those cost of living relief, and they're doing that. And people can see that we have delivered that right here at the Bowser and right here in Mortdale.
VP service stations in all of Sydney. Is that why you've selected this particular VP? Is there a reason why?
The prices around here, you'll find they're at very similar levels. I was seeing very similar levels down in Melbourne, where I was yesterday. Still out in regional areas. When I was up in northern Tasmania on the weekend, it'll take a little while for it to come through there. They're still just a bit over $2. Where I was about $2.03, $2.04. But we expect to see that come down. In regional areas, the way that fuel is moved around the country and when they've paid their excise is different. But here in the metropolitan areas, I'm very pleased with the way, whether it's BP or Ampol or others, have moved quickly to pass on those savings. But they can pass on those savings because of the economic management we put in place, which meant that we've had a $100 billion turnaround in the last 12 months. And if we'd listened to Labor, if we'd done what Labor said they wanted to do, then we would have been $81 billion out of pocket. and we would not have been able to respond, because Labor always knows how to start spending, but they never know how to stop. And that's the problem. And they never design it right. They never get it right. We saw that last time during the global financial crisis, when we saw failed programs all over the place. So it's just not enough to be well-intentioned. You've got to get it right, as we have.
Agreement between you and Dominic Perrottet where you'd pay half of the back home grants. That's not the case. You never agreed to pay half of that?
And I've written to the Premier again, stressing that we are very happy to share in the costs of that program for the 1 in 500-year flood event. That's what we undertook to do.
12 million. Is the issue that it's outside Lismore, some of this assistance?
No, we've said we would go to those places that are impacted by the 1 in 500-year flood event, because the types of programs that they're pursuing are programs that are done by state governments. There are some things state governments do 100%. There are some things Commonwealth governments do 100%. And as I said, we're $2.1 billion in support, which actually is far in excess of what the state government has responded to the floods with, and $1 billion of what we've committed is already in people's pockets. But we were very clear that on that particular program, we were prepared to meet half the costs of those places impacted by the 1 in 500-year flood event. Now, people on the ground wouldn't see any different. The program would still run, and we'd settle up those costs, as we do for all of these things, at the end. And our offer remains that we would meet those 1 in 500-year flood costs for those impacted properties.
She's called you a bully, but she's also said you're looking after Page but not Richmond. What do you say to that?
Well, it's just simply untrue, because the $7,000 or thereabouts which households have been receiving in additional disaster payments extend across all the 7 LGAs, including the one she lives in. And I said at the time that we listed those first 3 LGAs first, because they were the most obvious ones, and that was the advice of our agencies. And then I said we'd be assessing further, which we did, and we extended it to the other 4. So it's just wrong in fact.
Your hand.
No, you've had a few, Andrew.
The question best for you, or perhaps the Foreign Minister, but can I get an update on Western Sydney father Chau Van Kham, who's detained in Vietnam?
You're correct. Chau Van Kham is detained in Vietnam. We have been making very senior representations to Vietnamese authorities, including in person on my part to the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister and the Home Affairs Minister when I was in Hanoi at the end of last year. I raised it again with the Foreign Minister in a call last week and have discussed it on a number of occasions with the Ambassador. Our concern in relation to Mr Chau Van Kham, respecting the Vietnamese legal system, and we do. Our concern, though, is his age. He is in his 70s, he is unwell, and we have sought an appropriate consideration of his circumstances given those facts, and to have him allowed to return to Australia, and we will continue to press that case.
Have you put any update on where that came? Was more than 3 years now. His family is still very distressed at what's happening in Iraq. He's 72 years old now. He's very unwell from what we hear. Is there any idea on when that may happen?
Ultimately, that is a matter for the Vietnamese authorities, but we have sought their consideration of his circumstances, given his age and his health, and sought their support in having him returned to Australia.
Prime Minister, you talk about being the government of good economic management, and you like to talk about your roles on ERC and NSC. How does that gel with your decision as Treasurer to agree to the French subs project, and would you concede that's likely to cost Australia $5.5 billion for nothing?
No, I don't agree that's what it'll cost for nothing. That's not the case, because there is much that we've acquired through that process. But one of the things that has changed remarkably since 2016 was the strategic environment in which the submarines that we were looking to acquire would have to operate in. And that changed completely. And the opportunity for Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarines at the time of that decision was not present. It wasn't present. Australia needed the nuclear-powered submarines. That's what we need to keep Australia strong and to keep Australia safe. And I was not going to allow Australia to forego that opportunity when we'd worked hard to secure it. and that the submarines that we were going to buy were not going to be able to meet the task that we needed them to perform to keep Australia safe. So the plan B I had was better than plan A. And the plan that we have now is going to keep Australia stronger, and it's going to keep Australians safer. And it means that going through that transition is part of that transaction cost of doing that. But what we have learnt, the skills that have been acquired, all of these things go to our capacity to now go on with an even better project. And you know, there are hard decisions, Andrew. You were over there with me at the time at Carbis Bay. You were there when I met with the Prime Minister of the UK, and I was there with the President of the United States. And you were aware of how significant that meeting of the three of us was. Perhaps not at the time, that became clearer to you later. But that opportunity for Australia is the most significant defence agreement this country has entered into since ANZUS 70 years ago. And so, there are difficult decisions, and you've got to be strong to make those decisions. You've got to be prepared to wear the flak that comes from those who will criticise you for making those decisions, whether they be good friends in other countries or they be indeed others who will be critical of those decisions now. All I know is it was exactly the right decision to make for Australia. It took courage to make it. It actually took a lot of foresight and a lot of hard work to put Australia in the position to be able to do it. No other Prime Minister has been able to secure the technology from the United States to deliver nuclear-powered submarines to keep Australians safe. And that was a decision in the national interest, and a decision I'm very pleased that we're able to make under my government.
Just on isolation rules.
Yeah, sure.
Said his state follows the AHPPC advice, and you'd be aware that advice on Friday said don't lift the isolation rules yet. So what do you say to that?
Well, I've always been a fan of these isolation rules being eased, but they're decisions for premiers and they'll weigh those up in their own areas. I know the impact it has on the economy of people not being able to go to work, or the impact it goes with caring for children and the disruption that it has. And, you know, premiers, like Prime Ministers, have to make decisions that weigh up all of those factors, and I'd be encouraging them to do just that.